Well, thanks for joining us in the Storycraft Cafe. Today, I am super excited to have JT Ellison with me. JT is one of those folks that I have met over the years in podcasting about books, and just one of my favorite people to talk to about writing and storycraft. And yeah, when we started looking at starting this writers community, I knew that JT was one of those people that we had to get on. And thank you for joining me today, JT.
That is so sweet. Thank you. I always love sitting down to chat books,
Absolutely.
writing with you. It's so much fun.
Yeah, and we've had some great conversations in the
Really
past.
have.
So before we jump into this great discussion on character that we're going to today, what do you have coming up? What's coming up on your calendar?
So it's funny because it's probably the most character-driven story that I've ever done. So this is actually perfect for it. It's called It's One of Us, and it will be out in February. It's a big standalone about an infertile couple who find out that the son that he had through a sperm donation years earlier is the suspect in a murder.
Ooh,
Yeah.
don't you love it? Don't you love
Yeah.
it? Just for those of you who are just joining us, JT Ellison is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of more than 25 novels and the Emmy Award-winning co-host of the literary TV show A Word on Words. She also writes urban fantasy under the pen name Joss Walker. With millions of books in print, her work has won critical acclaim, prestigious awards, been optioned for television, and been published in 28 countries. That's
It's been
unreal.
a good couple of years.
JT lives in Nashville with her husband and twin kitties, where she is hard at work on her next novel. We know you are. JT, a question that I have had burning inside me is, what is the best Nashville hot chicken?
Oh, well, Prince's. You gotta go to
Okay.
the source.
Okay.
Gotta go to the source. All the rest of them are good, but and you gotta do it at 3 in the morning with a bunch of cops.
Right.
That's
Right.
that's how I experienced it for the first time. On my first overnight ride along with a bunch of patrol cops, and we had quite an evening, and they took me to Prince's, and they were like, "All right, well, this is what we do on our break." We eat hot chicken after we've dealt with murder. Okay, it was an evening.
Makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
That is a character driven that's
Yeah,
ripe for character development right there.
right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So over the last few years, your work has morphed a little bit as you have kind of drilled down and found a real sweet spot in writing thrillers and standalone thrillers. Especially, you began your work as writing a series, and you have kind of found a spot that's working really well for you. Could you talk just a little bit about that? The morphing that your work has gone through as you've kind of found the spot that you're most comfortable with, and the types of stories that are really resonating with you as a writer.
Sure. It's it's really interesting. I did start in series, and I wrote a police detective. She was a lieutenant, Taylor Jackson, and I did 8 books in that series before I just got bored. I mean, she's an amazing character. She was an iconic character,
Yes.
which is a lot harder than somebody who grows over the course of a book or over the course of the series. She's a hero, and heroes don't change, right? They are who they are. And I'd gotten kind of to the end of where could I take this character anymore, and how many serial killers can Nashville have, right? Um, and then I spun off and wrote her best friend, and now that was a completely different thing because she had tragedy happening in her life that was changing her. And I got a taste for, it's a lot more fun to
Yeah.
be able to grow somebody over the course of a novel. And I'd always planned to write standalones. That was where I was headed. I was going to write 10 series novels, and then I was going to write one big standalone. And I sort of did that with No One Knows, but at the same time, Catherine Coulter hired me to write the Brit and the FBI series with her.
Right.
Another series of characters who are relatively iconic. They fall in love over the course of the series, but I mean, they just don't change.
Right.
What I have discovered is I really enjoy the stories where the characters change, where they have a growth cycle. And I mean, it's just something I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't exactly plot out my career when I sat down to write that first book, right?
Right.
I mean, things just happen
Yeah.
and stories happened and characters happened. But now it's much more purposeful. I like to write about women finding their power. And
Okay.
if that's a cop, if that's a housewife, if that's a lawyer, yeah, a private it doesn't matter who it is.
Hmm.
Just that exploration of how their lives change over the course of the story. And that's where I finally found my sweet spot. That's the place.
So if you're talking about a series of books versus a standalone book, and in the the um the the thinking would be that when you're dealing with a series, that you can have more control over the character development, the character growth, because you have a much wider, broader canvas to work with. But there's something to be said about the confinement, the restriction of a single story when you've got 400 pages or 500 pages
Mhm.
to work with. And then that opens up new possibilities. There's something about the boundaries that offer new. I'm lacking the word. I keep grasping for the new opportunities with boundaries. How did you experience that?
See, and I'm feeling it the opposite because
Okay.
I thought that writing series gave me a broader canvas because the world's built, right?
Right.
And you are shifting your character through the whole story
Hmm.
from book to book, and it's how they react to the situation that they find themselves in. And the standalone would be very confining because you've only got 400 pages and you have to tell the whole
Right.
story. Yeah, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I
That's
I'm
what I'm sensing. But
I'm shocked to say that too,
yeah.
because I'm writing a Taylor book right now. I'm 83,000 words into a Taylor book, and I'm having so much trouble with it because
Mm,
the world's already built. And I mean, how much so I'm trying to change her because that is now a really exciting thing, and she has changed over the course of the series. And this is the culmination of all of those changes, and I actually realized that today as I was working on it, and she was thinking that, how much she has changed.
right.
And I was like, "Huh, that's funny." Yeah, I'm putting that in there because that's exactly the case. Whereas the standalone, there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. You can go into whatever direction you want. You
Right.
can change that character. You can bring up something from their past. You can introduce them to somebody new. There's just there's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more freedom.
Does reader expectation play into that? When you're dealing with a series, like you said, that the world is built, the rules are in place,
Mhm.
and people know that if they pick up a book in a series, and there ostensibly will be another one next year, that this character can change a certain amount, but there are certain things this character can't do
Right.
because we know we have to continue the story. So when you're writing that, does the reader expectation of knowing this is a safe, comfortable place, and it's going to change a little, but not too much, does that play into it?
I don't know, because I failed miserably at doing that. I wasn't able to do it.
Yeah.
It's become this was supposed to be a short story, and then it was supposed to be a novella, and now, then it was supposed to be the jumping off point for a new series, and I've just, I've kind of failed in my job here of doing that because once I got into it, I felt so constrained.
Yeah.
Just so constrained. Plus, I think anybody who's writing police procedurals is having a, kind of a come to Jesus of wow, what does this even mean anymore?
Right.
So things have changed so much in law enforcement over the past few years
Sure.
that you really, and, you can't just blithely go forward and pretend like things are the same. They're not.
Right.
And that's, I think once I got into that, and I was like, wow, everything has to change now. So
Yeah. When you're writing thrillers, you would think that these stories are plot driven, like that there's a scenario that you have dreamt up, but your books are very much character books, and they're about you. You present a character, you give us reasons to care about that character, and then you do horrible things to that character. And what do you think about the types or the genre that you like to play in, and whether do those things even make sense anymore? You think, well, this book is a plot driven book, or this category is a character driven, and do those boundaries um, have to be there, or can we subvert those expectations?
I think you have to execute both perfectly
Okay.
for books to work. If it's a plot driven book, it has to have a great plot. But you can't have a decent book without a character that you're rooting for. You have to
Right.
have at least one character that the reader really connects with and is rooting for. And that's why it's so interesting. We've had this huge group of books that came out with unreliable narrators, and
Yes.
the readers are like, I'm tired of this. I can't connect with any of these characters. I want people I can connect with.
When you can only write Gone Girl so many times.
You can only, yes. I mean, the domestic suspense novel has to morph into something else, or we're going to lose the readers, I think.
Yeah.
If you look at the New York Times list, it's rom-coms. And what is that? That's personality driven, right?
Exactly.
That's characters who, enemies to lovers, and they're really experiencing a lot of growth cycles in those stories and everything. There's some of my favorite. That enemies to lovers is my favorite trope ever. I love it. But I think readers are really wanting, they're tired. Now, I shouldn't put words in readers' mouths. Readers are smart. They know what they like. But
Sure.
I think the kitchen sink twist is maybe becoming a little passé,
Yeah.
because once you've conditioned the reader for a twist, if you have a book that's not that kind of book and they don't realize that, then they're disappointed.
Right.
So I think it's absolutely vital, if you're still writing in these twisty areas, you've got to have characters that the readers just want to champion, that they don't want to put down the book because they want to see what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
That's I think true of every genre, from literary to horror. You need a character that you love and you want to root for and you want to find out more about them.
Well, and you run the risk of readers becoming cynical, because they're always, thinking 2 pages ahead of
Sure.
the story you're telling, looking for how you're going to fool them,
Right.
and it becomes an exercise in futility. That this is no longer fun. This is me trying to figure out how JT is going to try to pull the wool over my eyes next.
Right. And JT's back there in her office going, oh my God, how am I going to pull the wool over their eyes?
Right.
It
And
just,
JT's popping, ulcer medication.
yeah, I'm like a Xanax trying to figure out how I'm going to pull this off. Yeah, it kind of, you lose your storytelling then when it's all about the twist, when it's all about, how are we going to shock the reader today? And if you can slide something in, great. But I tried to move away from that a while ago. I did
Yeah.
my big twist book. I've done a couple of big twist books, but I really am more interested in the nuance of how the story unfolds organically and letting something happen rather than cooking something up that I try to write to.
Right. Right. I want to ask you in just a moment about making characters likable, but before I do, we're getting some comments in the YouTube chat here about your bookshelf behind you and how everyone is loving your color coordinated bookshelves.
Let's see if I can get it out of the way.
That's fantastic.
It's
That is
pride in
fantastic.
my office all year long.
Is that just when you're avoiding writing? Is that what you're busy doing? Oh my goodness, look at that. That
Yeah,
is fantastic.
I'm panning around a little
Yeah, that's
bit.
fantastic.
We moved during the pandemic, and I got very, very lucky with an office. This is, I guess, a parlor probably in the house, but it's got this incredibly high ceiling. We've got a, kind of the peak ceilings.
Right.
And so I was able to go up 9 shelves on the sides. And then in this back wall, I can actually go up another couple of shelves.
That
So
is
I was like, that's
fantastic.
it. I'm putting in a library ladder, and it's going to be, me as Belle swinging across my office. It's going to be great. So thank
So envious of your library ladder. That is fantastic. That
I
is
like it. I
fantastic.
actually moved all of my TBR off of it. So now it's just got some galleys and the next two books I want to read. So I'm trying to control my it gets stacked full of books. And then when I have to put something away or get it down, I have to move everything.
So the
Right.
old saying, never judge a book by its cover,
Right.
that's kind of gone out the window, right? I mean, you literally have organized your office by book covers.
Buy book covers, and it's really fun. I know where most of them are, and
Yeah.
but I have been known to text somebody and say, "Hey, what color is the spine of Helen's new book? I can't find it."
I
It's kind of
love it.
like my own little chaos, right? It's my own
Yeah.
version of chaos right here in my office. I've got nonfiction over here, and the fiction's behind me, and then on the top, because the white I couldn't keep on going. And I have an idea of where things are, but I get surprised all the time, and it's so much fun to walk up to the shelf and be like, oh my gosh, I forgot all about that.
Well, it's chaos that you can control, though. You're in control of.
It's my own chaos. Yes,
Yes,
my own
you are
control.
you are the god of your book walls.
Yes,
That's fantastic.
I am the master of my domain.
Yes, yes. So, a year or two ago, we talked about a book that you had written, "Good Girls Lie,"
Mhm.
and I love this book because it had a bunch of characters that I normally probably wouldn't like, but you made a way for me to enter a world that I would never walk into and find something and some people that I care about. Um, what is it about taking characters that are that most people can't connect with, but finding ways for us to care about them and then want to go on a journey with them?
It's about their vulnerability, right? And
Yeah,
it's when you find somebody's vulnerability, you have usually an echo of something in yourself, and that's it, right? You connect,
right.
you're like, oh, okay. I've got an orphan who is shipped off to from England to America to go to an all girls boarding college, and it's not necessarily the path that she would have chosen, and she has to make the best of it. And every book I have some sort of theme that I'm exploring, and in this one it was bullying, right? I wanted someone to go from the most popular girl in school to the most reviled,
Mm,
because I think that's something that we can all connect with. I think,
right.
especially especially the literary community. I don't know that a lot of us were, the big man on campus, cheerleader,
Right.
football captains. I think we were all a little bit nerdy, right?
Yeah.
And I certainly think that we've all been on the receiving end of somebody who's trying to make our life hell.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether we were a nerd or not. Everybody's got that person in their life that just tried to make them feel small. And
Right.
I think everybody can connect with that. So that's very much what that story is. God, talk about a twist. Only books I've ever written that I knew the end.
Do you typically know how the story is going to end when you begin writing it, or is it a discovery of learning the characters and then going along
Yeah.
with them as they kind of discover things? Uh, so I'm assuming that you are not a detailed plotter from the beginning.
No. No, I'm not I used to not plot at all. Now I've discovered there is value in having an idea of where the story is going to go. So I do, it's 40 scenes. So if it's a novel, if I have 40 scenes and I know, that I can write down, and it's not like a big treatment. It's,
Sure.
Olivia is walking down the beach. Olivia and Park are having a fight. It's real simple stuff. But if I have 40 of those, then I know I've got 40 scenes times 2,000 words. That's 80,000 words of a novel
Right.
there. I usually will write up the 40 scenes and then I'll start writing and I will go back and look at the 40 scenes. I'll have the big ones will stick in my head. Uh,
Yeah.
Once I start writing, I'll realize that, 5 entries are the same scene. It just
Yeah.
morphs, but I don't like to know the end. If I'm not going on a journey, I get bored.
Right.
And if I know what's happening, I might telegraph it to you.
Yeah.
Uh, I've been known to change endings, finish a book, come back and be like, no, that's not right. I got to change this. I got to, add an epilogue or, whatever. Um, but that's a great little outlining tool. I just did it with a short story. I was like, all right, it needs to be 10,000 words. I'll do 10 scenes at a
Yeah.
thousand words a pop. And man, boom, it went really, really well. So I, outlining is, it's a smart thing to do. I have friends that literally, I mean, they build the entire skeleton.
Yeah. Me
All
too.
they're doing when they sit down to write is putting some clothes on it.
Right.
And I'm
Exactly.
I'm not like that. I mean, I'll give you a head bone and a leg bone and a pelvis.
Right. I'm that way a lot. I will sketch out some guidepost along the way, but I need to write a chapter or two first to kind of discover who the characters are and to
Sure.
get a feeling. And
Yeah,
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes they wind up being very different characters a couple of chapters in than I originally thought they were, and they just kind of develop a voice of their own.
Mhm.
What kind of process do you go through to discover your characters?
Um, it depends on how they're coming to me. So, in this new book, it's One of Us that's coming out. Olivia, I'd been waiting 10 years for her. And when she
Mm,
finally showed up, I knew it. And I was like, yep, there she is. She was walking down a beach. She was very sad. She had her arms wrapped around her and she was experiencing some sort of traumatic grief and loss.
mm.
And I didn't get to write that scene until the very end of the book,
Oh,
which
wow.
it sat there with me this whole time, and I knew that's where I was going with this woman.
Right.
I knew what she was experiencing, and I knew where it was going. In Her Dark Lies, Claire, I couldn't even figure out her name. She had 4 different names.
Mm.
I knew I wanted her to be kind of the me of old who,
Yeah.
I'm kind of a elderly punk rocker now. Um, and when I first moved to Nashville, I've got some tattoos, I had some piercings, had colors in my hair and stuff. And I didn't really fit in, especially with the junior league crowd that I was trying to fit in with. And so I took out the piercings and I started covering up the tattoos and I got rid of the funky colors in the hair and all of that, right? And I tried to change myself for these people. And it didn't work, of course not. You
Right.
have to be yourself. People won't like you if you're not yourself anyway.
Right.
So I've gone back and re-embraced all of my childhood punk rock girl stuff. But I wanted her to go through that experience.
Yeah.
And while I was doing it, I just couldn't connect with her. And she wouldn't connect with me. She wouldn't even tell me her name. I mean, I wrote 7 drafts of that story before she really
Wow.
finally admitted to me that her name was Claire. She had all these cool, I like boy names for girls. So she had all these cool names and not a single one of them worked. She wanted to be this quiet girl. She wanted to be that person. And I was trying to force her into a persona that she wasn't comfortable with. And when I finally realized, wow, her name is Claire. She's not a Logan. She's not a Harper. She's not a Reagan. She's
Right.
she's just Claire. And then
Yeah.
she came together for me. So naming is hugely important for me. That drives who the characters are, 100%.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but now that I think about it, I can't really connect with a character until I've named them and
Mhm.
given it really does become part of the personality.
Yeah.
So do you, you know, and let's just be honest, writing is the only profession where you can talk about how make believe characters will or won't, allow you
Right?
to, that that's we have one of the best, jobs
It's
in the world.
controlled psychosis. It's all it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, do you do you have a system of when you're discovering a character, do you sketch them out? Do you write down details about them? Do you um do you make character sketches? Some people will, say his favorite color is blue and he loves to listen to Black Flag, and his hair is purple and orange, and they go very detailed about them. Are you that kind of person, or just as you write, do they just kind of inhabit your head?
It depends. I mean, some of them just parade off the page immediately, and you don't even have to do that. Some of them, you like do an interview. I need to know. I mean, there are things I need to know. I need to know, what your life was like. I need to know, do you have parents? Do you love your parents? Do you have fights with your parents? Are you straight? Are you gay? Are you bi? What are you? What defined you? What label would you like to put on yourself? Um, how would you describe yourself to a group of people that you had never met? Just superficial things. What do you look like? What does your hair look like? What color is your skin? All of that. And then you get into the deep stuff, right? So once you've
Right.
kind of identified who this person is and where they fit in the world, then you get into, because I think music is a great way to find out, what kind of music do you like? What kind of books do you read?
Right.
Who are your friends? Who are the people? Who would you call if you, went to jail? Who would be the first person you got in touch with? Do you have a sister? Do you have a best friend? How do you interact with the world that you are being forced into from my brain? Uh,
Right.
and that's, but and sometimes all of those answers just come as I'm writing a character and I'm like, oh, it's so and so, and here they are, and they're just alive for me. And sometimes I do have to sit down, literally just interview them and try to get them to tell me who they are. Usually, if they're doing that, they're probably not right for the story. There's something about them
Mm,
that's not right for the story. And so instead of pushing them in, I'll just leave, I'll just leave them out and put them over here.
yeah.
Greg Rucka, who is an absolutely brilliant comic book writer and thriller writer. He did a post once that he showed, I think in story of, this is this story idea, this story, he thinks in characters. And that was a really good lesson to me, actually, of if you're going to be setting up, mind dumps of these are all the characters that are living in my head. I was doing it as these are all the stories living in my head. He does it with the characters, and so I started trying that. And it was like, "Oh, wow." So you can see this person goes to this person goes to this person
Right.
the Taylor world, this person needs their own novel. It's really kind of all over the place.
Yeah. When people are learning to write characters, one of the things that they invariably do is they want a main protagonist to be likable by the readers. And one mistake that a lot of people go through is they think that this character has to be perfect for people to connect with them and to want to root for them. And
Mhm.
maybe social media plays, into that some, because we all have to be perfect on Instagram and all of that stuff. And so we think that the people that we read need to be perfect and perfectly presentable. But those are not the characters that we typically really care for. We want them to be human. So how do you um how do you give a character enough flaws so that they are human and relatable, but not so much so that they're just despicable and it turns you off?
Right.
Do you have you ever had a character that just was right on that line and you had to play with dialing them back a little bit
Oh,
or
sure.
you know, the like could you talk about walking that line with humanity versus just being despicable?
So it's kind of interesting. The very first book I ever wrote it was a Taylor novel, and something was incredibly flat about this character. And, the story was cool, the setting was neat, it was Nashville, it was all this cool stuff, but there was something about her that just I couldn't connect with her. She was too perfect. She was too
Yeah.
pretty. She was too honorable. She was too good. She just, there just wasn't anything there to hang that on. And I actually talked to an English professor of mine from school. I asked her about it, and she said, "Well, she has to have a flaw." I'm like, "All right, well, that's great. What can her flaw be?" So I made her a smoker who was trying to quit smoking. And I at the time was smoking and trying to quit smoking. So it was very perfect. This is in my, early 30s, and she was in her early 30s. So I, I was able to connect with her on that level of frustration. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of opened the door for, oh, okay, that's who this person is. And now I can get inside. She also has a broken nose. She's gorgeous, but her nose is broken. So she's
Right.
perfect. And just and she used to get in trouble with the cops when she was a kid before she grew up to be a kid herself. That's how she ends up on the force. These so you can see I'm just peeling back these tiny little layers here and there.
Right.
And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, now I've got a fully formed, fleshed out character. And that's what you have to do. I mean, you start with who they are, and then you give them one flaw, and then you pull them back. Conversely, you have a villain, a terrible person that nobody can possibly root for, right? How in the world is it that we listen to Hannibal Lecter and want to hear more? Right?
Right.
There's something,
Right.
you can have the most horrific character in the world, but if you give them something that they're giving to the audience that's interesting. So, my absolute worst serial killer of all of my serial killers, I mean, some of them are just so over the top. Some of my killers just, villains in general, I shouldn't say killers, villains in general can be over the top. The one who creeps me out the most is the one that hurries home from the crime scene to feed his cat,
Mm.
right?
Right.
The most human of all of them. He's the most hideous of all of them, and he's the most human, and that's probably what makes him so scary to me. He's
Yeah.
not this over the top, "Mwahaha," kind of villain. He
Right.
he is absolutely he's doing what he's doing, he's compelled to do so. When I realized he was coming home to take care of his cat, I had to really examine, who is this guy? What is he
Right.
up to? Why? Why does he care so deeply about the cat? That's bizarre. And it really gave me a window into making him even creepier and even more compelling. So I think it's very important that you just find that thing about your character that people are going to be able to resonate with, that they're going to identify with. Everybody can understand, oh, I've got to hurry home and feed the cat. Just some of us are coming from a murder and some of us are coming from work.
Yeah, the idea of someone coming home to feed their cat after doing horrific things, that makes you question your own neighbors. Yeah,
Oh, sure.
like,
Well,
"Oh, are they serial killers? Oh my gosh."
that's my job. I have an overactive imagination, and I'm consistently looking out my window at the neighbors. I had we before we moved, somebody came to the house in the middle of the day to the house next door, and I'm looking at him like, that's a hitman.
Right.
That is a hitman. Why is he coming their house? Just
Oh, man. Let's take a question from the from YouTube. Eileen says, "I'm writing a series. It's supposed to question what makes someone good or bad. My MC is going to do some bad stuff, but during the bad stuff, how do you make sure your readers stick along for the ride? How do you keep from turning off readers?" I think is what she's asking.
I think that's an excellent question, and you have
Yeah.
to examine the morality structure of your story. That's it's really funny. It's one of the things I'm doing with this Taylor book. She is possibly the most moral character you will ever come across, and it's in her immorality that she is so challenged and so upset and so, that's just not who she is.
Right.
She is the white hat. What is she doing? Doing black hat things, and so that's whether it's a cop or whether it's a housewife who is, doing something nasty to a friend. You just need to make sure you understand where on the moral grayscale you are comfortable and keep them in that spot. If they do something so out of character, like, if you
Yeah.
have a really good person who, just out of the blue goes out one night and murders someone, that's not going to hold up,
Yeah.
right? There has to be reasons for it. There has to be justifications, not necessarily in the world, but the character has to be able to justify to themselves what they're doing.
Sure. And it probably also depends on some of the rules for your novel that you've set up, and how much you decide to show, as opposed to how much you want to keep off the page and allude to, and maybe that just kind of depends on the relationship that you built with your readers already.
Yeah, for
Maybe.
sure.
Um, the Grace said in the Storycraft Cafe, "I recently have been thinking a lot about dialogue and how to reflect character development in dialogue, so that the dialogue for each character is uniquely and distinctly in their voice. I've been thinking about it so much because it's hard, and I would love some advice." What about developing character's voice, and how much of that voice reflects their growth, and how much of the story do you reflect in what role does dialogue play?
All of it.
Oh,
I mean, seriously, dialogue
yeah.
makes or breaks the story. You have to be very careful I mean, dialogue is how people speak, right? You can't write grammatically correct sentences for how people speak. So if you're having trouble identifying, how that plays into your story, I highly suggest just go to a coffee shop and over listen, eavesdrop on people and hear what they say and how they say it. I would read dialogue heavy books as well. If you want thrillers that are dialogue heavy, Catherine Coulter, our FBI series, um, because I write more internally. I have a lot of exposition, a lot of description. My dialogue is very impactful when it comes, right? It's definitely there to drive the story forward. Uh,
Right.
I'm trying to, instead of having pages of backstory, a conversation between my characters is going to give you all the things that you need to know, right? It's
Yeah.
very important. Another great example, gosh, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I just finished that last night. Heavy banter. Banter is a really, really great way to see how you tell a story in dialogue. So I would highly recommend, picking up some of the fun rom-coms. Go watch some of the rom-com movies and see how they do it. I mean, then you go to the other side of the fence, you've got like John Wick, right?
Right.
Not a lot of dialogue going on. But you know everything that's happening, the story is being propelled forward. There's nothing wasted. There's nothing, so you just have to, it's something you just have to work on. It is
Yeah.
not something easy. Dialogue was my biggest problem when I started. And my husband told me, he goes, people don't talk like that. Go write how people talk.
Right.
And, they cut each other off, they interrupt, they drop things, they are not clear in what they are saying, you know,
Right.
misinterpret what you say all the time. Tonally, they aren't there. Those are all the things you need to think about for sure.
Yeah. Um, you have started writing some urban fantasy as
Mhm.
well, and you've got a new trilogy that is out. How does writing a different genre affect the types of characters? And urban fantasy is a little different than like high fantasy or epic fantasy in that a lot of the because it's urban fantasy, a lot of it is present day and present
Well,
society.
right.
So a lot of the tone is very similar to a thriller. Characters are modern characters, across the board. But does that different genre affect the types of characters that you come up with or the way they behave?
It's really, God, I love doing the fantasy. It's so much fun because there are no rules. Yes, it's urban fantasy, so it's real life,
Right. But with magic.
but with magic, right? You can't
Right.
just spend, you can't just suddenly, well, you can do whatever the heck you want because it's magic.
Magic, right.
Um, it is, it's kind of a breath of fresh air to create those characters with their abilities and watch them grow as they're going on. It's just so much fun. There's going to be 6 books in that series with 8 short stories, and then we've got a spinoff that so there's a
Love
whole
it.
world that we're building, right? And that you have to think that through much differently than you do with a real life story, with a thriller or a romance or anything. You have to be looking at how the discoveries of magic change the moral structure of the story.
Right.
It's the exact opposite, really, of what you're doing with a thriller, where you're confined by the moral structure that you build. Here in the fantasy world, it's like, all right, well, that's how that works. But now I'm going to be able to circumvent that by doing the spell or finding the book, the grimoire, and it's very fun. It's a very fun challenge, and it just keeps everything fresh. And my character is a librarian. She's a smart ass. She is just really into pop culture. She loves movies. She's constantly quoting and quipping, and she's just a blast, right? It's just, I wanted something lighter and happier, and she's still dealing with dark themes, but
Right.
she's doing it in a much lighter way. And that's, definitely, if you're struggling in one genre, try writing the story in a different genre. You know,
Right.
if you're writing a dark thriller and it's not working because your dialogue's not there, write that as an enemies to lovers. Just take that chapter that you're struggling with and introduce those characters together. And somehow, from the beginning of the chapter to the end, they have to find some common ground. Um, it is. Plus, you get to make up words. You get to make up words in fantasy where you don't get to do that in the real world.
Right. Right.
So
Well, and that's why I advocate for reading more genres than you typically will because there's always something you can learn from the rom-com writers, from the urban fantasy writers, and there's something you can bring in that will make your story stand head and shoulders above the rest. And you know,
that is so true.
yeah,
That I
and
mean, that's what I when I'm stuck in my real world stuff, I read fantasy because just the knowledge that we set up rules for ourselves that don't necessarily exist.
right,
We always give ourselves constraints that maybe we don't need.
yeah,
And that reminds me of, okay, you're getting lost in what you think needs to happen. Just let it happen.
yeah,
See what happens if you let it go.
right. Chet asks from the Storycraft Cafe, I'd like to get perspective on different approaches to character from the discover who they are as I write side of the spectrum to the I know the last time they ate blueberry pie and what their favorite ice cream topping is side of character planning. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there ever a time where you you just strictly write a character and discover them,
Oh, for
as opposed to the kind of cataloging all the things that you know about the character? Di- are there particular times where one works and one doesn't?
the former is my preferred method, right? I would so much rather sit down, have somebody's voice come out, and a lot of that has to do with what point of view you're picking, and whether it's first person, third person, are you going to be in present tense, past tense, all of that, right? That's very important to the story. But I much prefer the stories where I sit down with the character and they just come out, right? And I don't
Right.
know, that I'm not thinking, oh, they eat blueberries for breakfast. Um, they'll share the good hack on that is just let them share your own biographical details, right? Taylor Jackson is 6 feet tall, blonde, a former debutante. That's I gave her. She's a Taurus. She, all the things she spoke, all the things that I had, I gave to her because it just made it more relatable for me to get her off the ground. So never be shy about they don't have to be this wildly esoteric person. I mean, 90% of the people are not wildly esoteric people. They're just
Right.
regular folks. They're trying to do do right in the world. They're trying to be happy. They're trying to, raise a family and be a good person, you know?
Yeah.
So you don't really have to do more than that to start. You've got the person who's trying to function well in society and the person who's not, and the
Right.
person who never could, right? There's 3 different ones right there that are very, very interesting, different kinds of characters that could make it into your story.
Loris asks, I have a question. I have a character who will appear broken at the start of a story with a quiet and aggressive personality. By the end of the story, I want that character to find themselves a more outgoing and calm personality. Any advice on how I could develop well such a transition?
It's what the story does to them. It's what that so that's an example of your character is going to be changed by the plot. I would think that whatever the story is, they're going to change that person over the course of that story. The things that happen in the story are what change them. And that's the kind of growth. It sounds like they've got a chip on their shoulder, or they've got walls up, or something has happened to them in their past where they keep people at bay, stay away from me. They're very prickly. And maybe they meet somebody who shows them, a little bit of trust and a little bit of grace. And they give themselves that grace in turn and become a little bit softer towards the end of the story.
And that's a great example of plot being secondary to character, but being very important to character.
Mhm.
Like it's not character or plot; it's which one serves which purpose where. I guess is
Yeah, for sure. You can't have one without the other. And if you are trying to change a character over the course of it, then it's what happens in that story that, you know, somebody hates dogs, right? And
right.
the course of the story, somebody dumps a puppy on their step and they have to come to terms with the fact that, they have to take care of this thing. Are they just going to go take it to the pound, or are they going to, care for it? And the next thing you know, they're in love with the dog. It's really simple. This is not complicated stuff.
Yeah. As a writer with 20 some odd books under her belt, what's your daily writing life look like?
It changes depending on what I'm doing and which thing that I'm working on. I've always tried to do 1,000 words a day. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. I'm in the middle of at the beginning, I guess, of the 1,000 words of summer challenge, where you write 1,000 words a day for 14 days and publicly accountable. That's always great. I just came off. Somebody hates dogs is the most fictional thing JT has said so far.
I had to throw that out from Doug. That's yeah.
The so I try to write in the morning. I try to be at my desk like creative at 10.
Yeah.
I'm not a morning person at all. It takes me a little while to ease into I am so jealous of folks like Lisa Unger who, get up at 5 in the morning and write from 5 to 7, and then their day begins. And I'm like, oh, that's me. I get my best creative work usually between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. That's where I hit my sweet spot. So I try to write in the morning. If I've got 500 words before noon, it's going to be a good day. And then, I plug in again in the afternoon, I write from 10 to 12, have lunch, have a driveway date if it's sunny, go sit outside and get some vitamin D with my husband. And then we have lunch and then go back to work about 1:30, depending, when we started, and then work the rest of the afternoon. And sometimes depending on how many projects I've got going on at once, I'll work on Jane books, the fantasy novels in the morning, and Taylor or standalones in the afternoon. It just really depends on what I'm working on. I just did a short story. I think I mentioned the 10
Yeah.
scene, the short story, and I didn't work on anything else. I just stuck with that and plowed through it. And that was actually kind of nice, only doing one thing at a time.
When you have two projects going at the same time, do you ever have a character that bleeds over from one to the other?
No,
No.
no, because I mean, it's really, um, these characters are like my friends, right? So would you confuse would you
Right.
mix up Laura and Ariel? I mean, no,
Yeah.
they are so alive for me, so in my head. I'll find myself just sitting there going, I wonder what they're doing. What is she doing right now? What is she doing right now? Especially the fantasy stuff. I was like, what is she up to? What is
Right.
she doing right now?
Whose life is she wrecking right now?
Yeah, it's just kind of weird. We are, we joke it's controlled psychosis. We have all these imaginary friends, and they live in our head, and they talk to us, and sometimes they're mean and sometimes they're nice. And if we're lucky, we get to pull pieces of them and put them on the page and have a reader connect with them in some way. It's really, that means the good and the bad. We are all of our characters, good and bad.
And that's the best when you get at the end of the day, when I created that, and these people live with me and in me, and it's one of the best things ever.
Mhm.
um JT, thank you so much for coming on today and
Happy
talking
to.
character with us. If people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
My website, jtellison.com, which has a for writers section that some of the stuff might be a tiny bit out of date, but there is a post on how to build a character that has some pretty basic, step-by-step instruction things. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Thriller Chick. I'm not really on Twitter very much, but I'm definitely on Instagram a little bit, and on Facebook. And you can get to all of that through my website. And I've got a monthly newsletter that's a lot of fun. It's got recipes, and I give stuff away every month, just that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, JT. We're gonna send everyone to see you. And what's your next project that's coming out? I know that you've got a book coming out next year. Anything coming out the end of this year?
uh,
What's going on with the fantasy series?
yeah, the fantasy is coming out July 31st.
That's
I totally spaced it. So yes,
yeah,
Master of Shadows is coming out July 31st. And that is the second Jane Thorne CIA librarian novel. It is an absolute blast. She has to go to Paris. These have an international thriller component to them, which is really fun. So she's going to Paris to find her mentor, and things go a little awry. She gets on the radar of another terror organization too. She has to
so much fun.
it has to evade. So that's coming out. And then I've got a short story coming out on Amazon. It's an Amazon original that will be
Okay,
out in January, called These Cold Strangers. And then the novel comes out, It's One of Us, comes out the end of February.
awesome,
And the Taylor
awesome.
book is going to come out somewhere
Yeah,
in all of that. I'm hoping maybe in the fall. It just depends on when I get it done.
yeah. Well, keep us posted,
Will do.
and let's talk about it when it comes out.
Oh, I'd love
Uh,
to.
JT Ellison, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for joining us here in the Storycraft Cafe. We'll be back with more.